Architecture lecture series. This is our kickoff evening, and it's a new world for us. It's all coming to you live, but remotely from URI. And with that, I'd like to have a video describe a little bit about our college, the College of Arts and Sciences, that is helping to sponsor this.
Nobody is going to ever replace the capacity of a human. And this is why thinking is our #1 obsession.
What's great about URI, especially in arts and sciences, we're a liberal arts college within a bigger school. And so you get that liberal arts feel, but you also get the ability to do research. We, as the flagship school of our state, do cutting edge work.
You have to really look at schools as a place to grow as yourself. You're not going to be handheld anymore. This is a time for you to really delve into yourself and find what you like. It needs to be somewhere that you're going to find to be a home, but also a place to build yourself. And I think that URI does a great job of that.
Students learn when they engage and get their own hands in that material. You're going to construct knowledge. You're going to do research. That's what creates transformative experiences. That's what creates people who are passionate about learning.
Rather than simply acquiring a body of knowledge, they themselves are developing in a way that keeps them agile, constantly able to re-educate themselves, constantly able to think critically, to adapt to new ways of learning, new ways of thinking, and to keep evolving throughout the course of a life.
Undergraduate liberal arts education is so transformative to the mind, to who you are.
The humanities and the arts are there to help you explore the fringes of what's possible, and understanding how you can look at the world in new and different ways and be ready whenever changes happen.
Multiculturalism and multidisciplinarity are very important because it gives you a unique perspective. You see students are actually excited to see people that think about problems from a different perspective. Problem solving can be attacked from different points of view.
It's nice to be able to come to a school where there's like so many different narratives, so many different perspectives. There's a place for everybody.
I think really what URI has to offer is the people and the opportunities. The people around you, they're all going to help you grow in ways that you've never understood before.
I think there's a lot of people, students in particular, that are just excited that whatever field they're in, they want to be the best at it. There's a sense of pride in the work that you put out there, and I think that's kind of infectious.
A College of Arts and Sciences education gives you the confidence to bring together all the strands that you value and apply them in ways that are fulfilling for you as an individual, but also resonate out.
The thing that sets URI apart is that we as a faculty and as an institution ask our students not just what you can do, but who can you be?
We're a small place, there's no denying that. I kind of think we're like a best kept secret.
Hello, I'm Will Green. I'm the chairman of the Landscape Architecture Department here at URI. And I want to welcome students, faculty, alumni, friends to this, the kickoff of our 2020-2021 Landscape Architecture Lecture Series. At the outset, I want to thank a few individuals who have helped in pulling this series together. Lisa Smolensky, our administrative assistant, and two students, Lindsay Corsi, for producing our poster, banner, and marketing cards, and Miranda Hume, also a senior in landscape architecture, who's helping cull through the comments and questions for later in the program, and I hope you'll make comments. I also want to give a special thanks to Leah Cooper of the Harrington School here at the College of Arts and Sciences. She's helped us immeasurably. This would have been impossible without her, so she was great and continues to help us. I'd also like to thank those who help support us financially, even in a time where no one's driving, flying, taking a train here. They include the College of Arts and Sciences, the university libraries, the Department of Art and Art History, the Department of Landscape Architecture, the Rhode Island chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects, Landscape Forums, and the G.P. Fiala Endowment. So a lot of people come together to help keep our series running, and we greatly appreciate it. This is our 28th year of a series, and for much of the time we've selected topics that have been current, timely, and quite important to our students and to the mission of landscape architecture here at URI. In recent years, we've celebrated women, focused on climate change, and we continue to champion sustainability and resilience through design. This year, we are asking our guests to address current issues that include activism, equity, and environmental justice. So this series is about how designers engage the public and are able to reach sometimes a very underrepresented community, a community of single parents, minorities, the poor, the elderly, working families, those with limited resources, access to technology, people who don't speak the language or are uncomfortable coming into or speaking at public meetings, undocumented, the homeless, disabled, and others who may be underserved. Can we design parks and plazas, streets, and entire communities that are accessible and welcoming to a diverse community? We know it is not easy. We see that in the news every day. So we asked a group of designers who are doing exciting things and reaching diverse communities in urban settings to share with us some of their ideas, methods, and projects. For a list of speakers, you can go online to the Landscape Architecture website, and we've got our poster. We've got a press release that is out as of this week. So you can learn as much as you want, and we welcome you to come back for all 10 dates that we have. How will tonight work? Well, we have two speakers. We've asked them to speak for a certain amount of time, and I hope they will stay within the limits. Cheri Ruane will be our first speaker. After she finishes, she'll take a breath, I'll take a breath, but then I'll immediately start introducing our second speaker, Danielle Desilets from KZLA. As the speakers are engaged or trying to engage with you, I hope you will use our comment area on your screen and ask questions, make comments, and we'll return to that at the end of our second lecture. So let me introduce Cheri Ruane. This is not her first time here at URI. She's wonderful, and I asked her to come because of the topic. She's a vice president and practice leader of landscape architecture with Weston and Sampson, a multidisciplinary firm with offices around Massachusetts and elsewhere. Cheri's a registered landscape architect with more than 20 years of professional experience as multidisciplinary project management, community engagement, construction administration, and even in business development. She's a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects, past president of the Boston Society of Landscape Architects, and she received her master's in landscape architecture from Harvard's Graduate School of Design. I would normally say, let's welcome Cheri, but I will welcome Cheri Ruane.
Thank you so much, Will. I really do appreciate being here. The commute was perfect. It really, there was no traffic whatsoever between here and my kitchen. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I really did love being in the lecture hall at URI, but we do what we got to do in these crazy times. So I'm going to talk to you guys for about 23 minutes, give or take. And I want to cover a little bit about the work we do, but I also want to cover a little bit about how equity works with that, and then how I, as a practitioner, think about how you integrate equity into your day-to-day. So I am going to share my screen with you all. And the first slide is an image, there it is, of the Somerville Community Path. And for those of you that don't know, Somerville is an incredibly dense community. It's the most densely populated community in all of New England. It used to be all of the United States, but Los Angeles and New York sort of like one-upped us. And I live there, so I speak of it as my own. But the important parts about Somerville that I think inform a conversation about equity include the fact that this really diverse population, a lot of undocumented immigrants, a lot of people where English is their second language. In my children's K through 8 school, 54 different languages are spoken. That's a lot of languages, and that's a lot of culture and a lot of different backgrounds that come together into what creates people's quality of life. So the project that we worked on was actually an extension of the community path, and that's what you see here. And a couple of things that we did based on what we heard in a way that we believe reinforced this idea that as landscape architects, we can be vehicles and agents of equity. We listened a lot. This was a Massachusetts Department of Transportation project, and there is a very prescribed public engagement process that includes a stenographer, not kidding. If they don't show up, the meeting's canceled, little tiny typewriter sitting in the corner. And there's a very set procedure that you go through. There's 3 meetings, you have them in public places that are accessible, you listen to the community. And I think that model was successful for a really long time. And I know that there are still some communities that subscribe to it. But what we found was actually that's not an equitable format. It doesn't mean that everybody can get there. Some people work nights. It was typically a weeknight. Some people work nights. Some people have childcare issues. Some people don't speak the language. And so this was a really important project for us to understand that as the designers, we actually had an obligation to make sure that we were really hearing the entire cross-section of the community. And what came out of that, and I'll get into some of the techniques in a little bit, but what came out of that was some really interesting stuff. One of the things was in this middle picture, you can see, I have 2 screens, so pardon the switchy switch. But in this middle part of the screen, you can see that there are these yellow 4-foot wide running tracks on either side of a 12-foot wide paved multi-use path. And that came out of us understanding that when people run, they don't always want to run on asphalt. And if they have an opportunity to run off asphalt, they will, which means that if there's grass right next to the asphalt, it turns into dirt, which then turns into mud, which then erodes and undermines the asphalt. So just in talking with folks that run all the time, it became clear that if we were going to build a path that was really supporting all users, it had to include, and it's got a rubberized surface on it. We've got to include a way to separate out folks that want to run or walk from folks that want to ride their bikes. And so that was one thing that came out. Another thing that was really interesting is this amphitheater seating, and there's an integrated 4.5% walkway that brings folks up should they not be able to navigate the stairs. And this came out of the fact that Somerville only has 4% open space. And so how do you navigate only having 4% of your city, which is only 4.1 square miles with about 80,000 people in it? And how do you maximize those open spaces in a way that truly is useful for everyone? So a multi-use trail is amazing, and it's a way to get from A to B, but in such a precious, tight urban environment, can't we make this more than just a way to get from A to B? Can't we make it actually a linear park? And so we talked to folks about what was needed, and what were needed were spaces to hang out, were spaces to exercise. This is exercise equipment worked into some of the side pieces. Were ways to connect seamlessly between the community path and the surrounding neighborhood, which the path is on an old rail line, which of course was contaminated, because what's a project without some good contamination? But it was lower. In some cases, it was 20 feet lower. And so making sure that these seamless connections and ways to connect to the neighborhood that were intuitive and safe and clear were also contributing to the overall experience. Some other work that we do that I find really important as far as when it comes to equity is thinking about athletic fields. So this is in Barnstable, Massachusetts on the Cape. And we do these plans all over cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth and frankly up and down the East Coast. But what we find is when we have a public meeting, we get a lot of really well organized sports groups that come out, typically middle-aged white men, and they really strongly and confidently advocate for their particular sports league. So typically it's a paid league. It could cost anywhere from $300 to $1,000 to join per season. It's lacrosse, it's soccer, it's baseball, it's football. It's more often than not, it's boys teams, but we absolutely see representation from girls teams. It's not typically just cheerleaders and football players, although those gender norms are well represented in this slide. I think in those meetings, we really have an obligation to ask the question of who else uses these spaces. It's not just you guys. It's great that you use them, and we get that you use them, and you use them really prolifically. But who else uses them, and do they need to be more of a community resource? There are tons of groups that will assemble in an informal way and use the outfield of a baseball diamond as a soccer pitch. How do we make sure that those voices are heard and are reflected in an overall plan? So that's just another example of where I see it being a really important component and integration. Another place that we really need to search for the voices that are not being heard are typically in places that are environmentally compromised. So this was a mill yard up in Sanford, Maine, and there were a lot of property owners that were well represented in these meetings, but a lot of the residents in the now city, it used to be a town of Sanford, really were not getting heard. And again, the night meeting wasn't going to cut it because of their other obligations. So we actually did site walks on Saturdays. We did lunchtime seminars. We did some evenings, but then we did some mornings. And then we did a whole day retreat where we had everybody come together and hear what each other had to say. And we used things like the clickers, the automated response system. We used dot voting. We used lots of techniques that didn't require people to stand up at a microphone and speak their mind and potentially be ostracized by their neighbors, but to have a say and then have that say reflected in a plan. Here's an example of a park in Worcester, Massachusetts that had, it's incredibly multi-generational, densely populated, lots of different uses, and there were a lot of different demands on the space. And so working with the community to figure out how to include everything, because as much as we'd love to think a park can be all things to all people, it simply cannot. It can't do it sustainably. So it was making sure that everyone was hearing each other. So whether it was tennis or pickleball or handball or play or more passive open space or basketball courts or whatever it was finding a way that those got integrated into the site and then were able to speak to a particular demographic that was consistently, we were seeking out to be heard. And actually a really big deal in this community was having a pool that would allow kids and adults learn how to swim. It's certainly a life skill, a health, safety, and welfare issue. In a lot of places, it's really hard to sell that because it's only open for 6 to 8 weeks a year. It's a ton of money. It's hard to staff. There's liability issues. But it's really important that people learn how to swim. And so how do we as designers advocate for that in the bigger picture? A project that I will talk a little bit more about than others, we're working on the Boston Common Master Plan, actually with Kyle Zick Landscape Architecture, which is a firm you'll hear from shortly. And I think one of the things that we've been charged with that's been the biggest challenge is how do you hear from all the voices? As I've just been saying about all these other projects. And I think in this particular case, we really were able to reach a lot of people in ways we hadn't been able to before. So you can see on this slide, we've got this image of what we were calling the mini common. It's actually over in the bottom right-hand corner as well. And that is a pop-up that we created, and we went to every single neighborhood in Boston at their most popular event of the season. So if it was a the vinyl record sale in Roslindale, or the African Festival in downtown Boston, or the Lantern Festival in Chinatown, we were there. And we met people where they were at, which is a super important part of reaching people. And then we provided ways for people to engage that did not require them to use their voice in public, because not everyone is comfortable with that for about a million different reasons. So your voice could be heard in many different ways. In the board that you see up here on the top right, we actually had asked people to put a pin in the map at the beginning and end of their bike route, and then put a string between them. Lots of people bike through the common, it turns out. That's no surprise. They're not supposed to, but they totally do. But this was a way that we were getting data that we wouldn't have gotten if we were just asking people to speak. This is actually an image of my project team out on the site a few weeks ago. No, I'm only kidding. These were actually some of the things that we were looking to coordinate, and making sure that the People's Park, which the Common is known as, really was a park for all people. And the only way that it can truly be a park for all people is if we hear from all people. So a couple other things that were really important in making this master plan work are obviously engaging not only the community, but the tourists, lots of tourists on the Common. Rejuvenating the physical landscape, and also understanding that circulation is an important part of any park, but how you move through a site needs to be inclusive. And then also making sure that stormwater management, drainage, all of the other nuts and bolts were really well integrated into the plan. But none of that can happen without robust public engagement. And social media has become a really important way that we share that. So these are just some images actually from our website that I thought were really interesting as I was preparing for this. We've often been accused as landscape architects at Weston and Sampson. We are a small group, but we are a mighty group. There are 700 people at Weston and Sampson. The design program has about 30. And yet most of the pictures on the website are ours. Why is that, you ask? Well, the other work that Weston and Sampson does is water supply, sewer, wastewater cleanup, environmental cleanup, and while incredibly important, they don't make for good copy. So you'll see here some of these images of public engagement. Here's us in Chinatown talking to Marty, handing him one of our very popular stickers. Here's an image of some of the work we did for Petix Island Master Plan, where we actually went out to the pavilion, the Boston Harbor Islands Pavilion on the Greenway, and we set up for a whole bunch of hours on a Saturday. It turned out to be beautiful, thank goodness. And we asked people to take these colored chips and vote for what they thought would be the best use of Pedix Island. And also that we had online surveys to take. There were explanations about the master plan, but this was an incredibly well attended public engagement. It was advertised, but most of the people were just walking up. They were walking through, they were passing by, and they stopped to engage. So that was a lesson in, again, just being available and making yourself accessible. This is another Pedix Island meeting, and this is bringing together all of the different agencies. So in this image is National Park Service, ACR, it's folks from Boston, it's folks from fundraising communities, it's folks from Boston Harbor Now, and it's making sure that all of these voices are heard in a way that people can acknowledge that there's a lot of different voices around the table, but also, again, keeping equity at the center of the conversation. So every time somebody came up with a suggestion, the next question was, how do we make sure this reaches everybody? I think this next image, this is one of the engineers' public engagement. I don't know if you can spot the difference. It's hard to detect, but here you see a very different approach to talking about engineering topics in a very engineering-based way. And what we find is that that does not reach the general population. It may get folks who have more time on their hands. It may get folks that are looking for something to do at night besides go to a public meeting, but I don't think it gets the same cross-section of voices. So back to my point earlier, how do we reach all these different people? What are the ways? There are many different ways, and this is just a smattering, but I wanted to summarize them for you. The site walks and the hands-on design charrettes, these are things that we do at all hours of the day, every day of the week. It cannot be a 6 o'clock on a Tuesday every single time. Multi-day workshops. We have people come from all around. They'll come for multiple days. They'll come for one day, really getting people engaged and returning to keep the conversation going. We also do a lot of consensus building and strategy sessions, and those are some of the dots that you saw, where an idea will come up and then everyone gets 3 dots and you get to put your 3 dots on your favorite ideas. That very quickly gives you a heat map of and reads the room as to where folks are. In addition, we do a lot of print work. We try to make things compelling and tell a story. We will mail things. There are many a late night in conference rooms, sticking registered mail stickers on the back of envelopes, good times. Also online, obviously, project websites are key, social media feeds. We've spent so much time on the Boston Common Master Plan, making sure that our social media feeds are getting to the right people and are being picked up, and looking at the analytics, and then looking at our survey data to say who's taking the survey and where is it coming from? What zip codes are people tuning in from? And now that we are in a time of COVID and everything is virtual, we actually had a few hybrid situations, much like my children's schooling, which I won't even get into. That's a different meeting for another night. But I feel like we're now able to really reach actually a much broader population. Whether we're on site and we're live streaming it, or whether we're having a meeting like this and we're recording it and it's available for anybody to watch later or another time, we really have seen a huge bump in engagement and participation. So these are just a smattering of some of the projects that we work on, from master planning, which again is this higher level assessment of an open space. What is the plan for this space over a number of years? It's not necessarily going to be built at one whack. It's actually going to be phased in over time. And how do you have that conversation today? And then how do you continue that conversation as the phases are implemented to ensure that the intention of that master plan is adjusted appropriately, but also the integrity is maintained? Parks and playgrounds, obviously a huge part of our work, my favorite part of our work. We designed the Menino playground in Charlestown. That was Boston's first inclusive playground, and since then we've done several others, really with inclusivity at the top of the conversation. And I think what's important to keep in mind about that is that inclusive doesn't mean that everyone can be there. Inclusive means everyone wants to be there. It's compelling for an incredibly diverse population. Everyone feels safe there. Everyone can experience it in a very similar way with close proximity. And everyone really seeks it out as a resource. And they may not be able to pinpoint exactly what about the space makes them feel welcome, but they just know that they feel like a part of a community there. And that's been a really important part of our parks and playgrounds. Resiliency is a whole nother issue that I won't get into, but it's a huge part of our work, especially in waterfront parks, where parks can be the first line of defense against sea level rise and climate change. And we have worked tirelessly with our interdependent team of engineers and scientists that then we need to translate the technical data, preferential flood pathway, and all these other things to the public and explain how the park design is actually going to respond to those things. We talked already about sports and recreation. It is a really important part of communities, and we want to advocate that it doesn't become privatized feeling. We don't want it to be, oh, well, only, varsity football gets to use that field. We need to start thinking about ways that these fields can be more of a community resource. So here's some examples of ways that we were out there in the public. This was at Emerson when we used to be able to sit 6 inches from each other, where we made a presentation. We had breakout groups around the room. We typically will have like 8 to 10 people from our organization and Kyle's organization and others there to talk to folks, because again, that person-to-person contact is where we feel like we get the best feedback. This is the mini common. This was actually the African festival, and you can see we have tried to incorporate things that are fun and compelling, and we had this logo designed for the project. So we took the logo, we turned it into t-shirts because everyone loves t-shirts. I bought matching Chuck Taylors because everyone loves Chuck Taylors. And we made some of those trees lifelike, and then we took some of the things from the common, like squirrels and a cannon and other things, and we made them into props. They were incredibly popular with the children. So here's some of those children. I keep forgetting what screen I'm on. Here's some of those children. This was Chinatown. And you may think that they're there for the seats and the fun trees and the plastic squirrels, but really they were there for the lollipops that are right on that table. But we're not proud. We'll take them any way we can get them. But this slide actually captures a lot of what the different techniques were, and meeting people where they're at, going to their neighborhood, having a whole bunch of folks that can speak the language, making sure that that language is represented in written form and in oral form. This was actually Des. He was a member of our team and spoke Chinese, and we recruited a few students from the Boston Architectural College to come help us. And we reached out to folks and really engaged in a way that we got some pretty meaningful feedback. So I have 1 minute left, and I'm going to summarize by, trying to encapsulate how I think about equity. And I've got a couple of photos that actually I use to sort of summarize my career. I started off reaching out to schools and helping to teach kids how to design their own schoolyard, because it felt important to me that they know that they could impact their built environment. That creates equity. These kids, what a pain in the butt these kids were, but so cute. I went into these kids' school and we talked about plans and measuring, and we looked at different parks, and ultimately some of their ideas informed the park that's now outside their school. These kids they're in high school now. They still see me and talk about this day. And that creates equity because they're empowered to know they can inform their built environment. Live it, right? I'm an avid feminist. I am a champion for equity everywhere I go. And I go where I believe my voice is needed most. And as a landscape architect, I think it's important that we immerse ourselves in what we believe in. This is the Pride Parade last year. Again, these are days when we had parades and could just touch each other in ways that we can't anymore. But we represented the Boston Harbor Islands and the Boston Society of Landscape Architects. And I cannot tell you the cheers that we got as we rounded the corner because we were part of the National Park Service area of the Pride Parade. And the fact that the federal government was in a Pride Parade in a really meaningful way was actually a moment of great connection that felt like equity was alive. And it's something that, aside from the sequence tube tap, which was also a huge score, I'll never forget. And build things that you love, build things that make you happy and make you proud. And remember that ultimately the goal is to pass this on and to share the message and share the power of being able to design parks as public infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheri. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who will probably appear on the screen momentarily. Danielle Desilets is a senior associate at KZLA in Boston. She's a registered landscape architect, and she received her MLA from Cornell University. And I am proud to point out that she received her BLA from URI's landscape architecture program. So anytime we have an alumna come in, we are on cloud 9. So that's special. Nothing to take away from Cheri. She probably gets the same treatment from UMass as an undergraduate as well. Danielle's been practicing landscape architecture for 20 years, focusing on historic and cultural landscape preservation and on campus planning, as well as on design for accessibility and sustainability. She was project manager for the URI Landscape Master Plan from 3-4 years ago. It was for the Kingston campus. And she spent a lot of time here with people from her office, some of whom were also alums from URI. Since 2014, she's been project manager for more than 25 public park and open space projects for KZLA. They focus on historic preservation, recreation, urban wilding, and on increasing accessibility, as well as green infrastructure. Danielle helped develop a comprehensive trail plan that included a large analysis and making recommendations for 40 miles of existing trails in the 6,700 acre Gettysburg National Military Park and Eisenhower National Historic Site, both in Gettysburg. With that, I'd like to welcome Danielle.
Thanks, Will. And thanks, Cheri. That was great. I think it's great to have both Cheri and I here. I'm going to try not to talk with my hands. It's hard to do because I think a lot of the work that we do is fairly similar. Fortunately, there's enough of it to go around since we're working in some of the same communities and sometimes on the same projects. But our firm is a bit smaller, but I'll get into that in just one second. I'm actually going to start. Perfect, thank you. I'm going to start with, I'm going to start from the back. So I graduated, as Will said, from URI Landscape Architecture Program in 1999, and my first job was in Central Mass, where I actually am again now, working for a small, very new residential design build firm, and just kind of fell into my lap, so I went with it. And while I really enjoyed getting to know the people, the clients that I was designing landscapes for very closely, because I was very closely crafting these sites for mostly residential for a handful of people, but it wasn't quite what I wanted. I knew coming into landscape architecture, one of the reasons why I found it, because I wanted to do something creative, but I also wanted to find my little way to make the world a little bit of a better place. And the residential, not to take from anything from that, but that just wasn't the right fit for me. So the firm I was working for at the time, we won this project, Great Brook Farm State Park in Carlisle, Mass. It was then with the Department of Environmental Management, which is now Department of Conservation and Recreation for the state. And our goal was to take this, essentially this cornfield and gravel parking lot, and to turn it into a sustainable site that was treated stormwater, but also you can see some of the contours on the site. This whole thing was just steeply sloping. The parking lot was originally in here, but to try and get people access to the water, and it was very significantly sloping. So we were able to do that with very careful grading, but it was importantly for me, it was kind of the first point where I realized, one, that this site had a background to it. It had a whole history before it became a state park, which was a key thing, but also it was my first taste of really designing for the public, designing with the public and designing with state entities, and really trying to get make a site fully accessible with some significant grading challenge. And I'm a history nerd, but I'm also a math nerd, so I love the grading challenges, and I can do it thanks to Will. So that was kind of my start and my first taste of public design, and it really caught me. And so 9/11 happened, the 2001 recession happened. I went back to grad school, got my MLA, as Will mentioned, and from then on started focusing on public landscapes and historic and cultural landscapes. So fast forward 20 years later, we're here today, and I'm working with Kyle Zick, Landscape Architecture, where typically in downtown Boston, that's where our offices are, but there's only 6 of us and we're pretty spread out right now. I think we're staying that way for a little bit, to make sure we're staying safe. But this is a kind of a smattering of the type of work we do, but if you were to quarter any one of us, we would tell you our top 3 things were, our top 3 focuses in design were campuses, passive parks, and historic landscapes, all of which are very, not necessarily all public because they're private campuses, but all very community-oriented landscapes. And every one of those has some sort of robust community engagement. At KZLA, and the firm is just 10 years old. I think I've lost 2020. We've designed over 125 miles of trails on 25 different landscapes, 10 beaches and waterfronts, and a handful of playground exercise facilities. 60% of our work in the last few years has been with Massachusetts municipalities, and 70 to 75% of our work is public overall. So that's the local, but also we work, as I mentioned, with state entities, and we also do a fair amount of work with the National Park Service, and we've done work with the State Department as well in the past. Personally, I think, I couldn't do the math, but I'm guessing probably closer to 90-95% of my work is with public entities, which is perfect for me. And not all historic, but a fair amount of it. So because KZLA, we do focus on historic landscapes, I had to throw it back to Fred. And there's a quote on the screen that comes from actually his submission, or his and Calvert Vaux's submission to the city of New York for the Greensward Plan in 1858, which became Central Park. But I think it's interesting, just his democratic ideals in landscape architecture, he being, of course, the father of American landscape architecture, and which really spurred him because of a visit to the United Kingdom. He was traveling around in England and had gone to Birkenhead Park and realized that even the poorest, there's a quote, but I'm paraphrasing, the poorest people and the Queen can all enjoy the same park. And that really stuck with him. And that's how he brought that ideal to all of his landscape, all of his public landscapes. And there's a quote, when I was thinking about this, this talk tonight, there's a quote from an article, Do Beautiful Parks Strengthen Democracy, written by Garrett Nelson, that I found was kind of extraordinary. And it says, but while his name has justifiably become synonymous with the design of America's greatest public spaces, thinking of Olmsted as just a skilled landscape architect is like remembering Martin Luther King Jr. as just an eloquent speechwriter. Olmsted parks aren't merely pretty places, they're social arguments. They're some of the most important testing grounds for American democracy in action, places which express a confidence in our ability to recognize and promote the common good. And I think especially in days like today, and Massachusetts has officially been in lockdown, sort of more or less, for the last 6 months. And I think everyone came to realize how important public parks are to the broader community if they didn't already. So I had to start with Fred. So at KZLA, a lot of our process is probably fairly similar to Weston and Sampson, so hopefully I don't duplicate too much of what Cheri said, but that just shows you that it works. Our main goal is really we research as much as we can from our office and from the sources we have. We go to the site and learn as much as we can there, but we know that the public we're never going to know any public park or public space as well as the community that uses it on a day-to-day, season-to-season basis. So we want to go and pick your brains. We want to hear all the memories. We want to hear all the anecdotes. If someone grew up in the area, what it used to be like, why, and then we learn how things evolved to what it is now and what the direction it needs to head. So this is a typical project schedule. We more often than not have at least 2, if not 3 or 6, depending on the project, public meetings. As I said, we'll absolutely start with historical research, even if it's not a quote unquote historical site, just because we want to understand the background and the context and why it is the way it is today. And we'll do all the site analysis, the solar and the plants and everything that's out there, understanding the site itself. And then we want to take at that first meeting, kind of present to the community what our understanding is, and to learn where we've erred, what we've missed. But our goal is just to listen and kind of pick people's brains as much as possible, hear everything we possibly can. Then more than likely we'll go back and do some designing, create some options. The second meeting, more often than not, tends to be a selection of options that we present and kind of get some feedback. And typically the third meeting ends up being a preferred option that more than likely is an amalgamation of all the other options that we've looked at and probably some new ideas that have come from the community or jumped in along the way. There's a lot of other community meetings that we do, or there's, for example, a conservation commission, historic preservation commission. We have to go to city councils, design review boards. All of these meetings that are public meetings are all open to the public. So all of those mean that there's an additional opportunities for people to speak up. Similar to what Cheri showed, this is the old school, the town hall style meetings. Any way to get face-to-face contact with people, again, today doesn't work quite as well, but we're working through it. Classic town hall meetings to bring a community together. Just as Cheri said, we'll look at try and get people as engaged as possible. We don't want to just be sitting talking to you or have a big group. We want to break down. We want to have conversations and provide different opportunities so that technical difficulty. And different opportunities and opportunities to talk about different items, different elements. We want to engage people in as many different ways as possible. Again, as not everyone's going to be comfortable putting their hand up in one of those big meetings, either because they know they have an opinion that's different from their other community members, or they're just not comfortable talking in larger groups, which is very common. So we're trying to find ways that we can find something that people are interested in and engage them and dig the intricacies out of that a little bit more, out of the people that come in. We do stakeholder meetings. The main picture there is from a National Park Service, those the Gettysburg projects that Will mentioned, stakeholders. So it's not just the people that live and use the community on a regular basis. It's the people that, in this case, we're running tours through it, so it's part of their money making, of their livelihood. So we had to talk to them about how it functions for them and what doesn't function for them. Design charrettes, putting things up, those are classics. This is for the URI Landscape Master Plan. We did a pop-up in the Memorial Union. We wanted to get as much information from the students, and so we kind of used maps and strings to figure out how people were walking through campus and the most used routes. We gave them red and green stickers to say good spots, bad spots, just trying to get as much different feedback as possible. As Cheri mentioned, pop-up engagements in the parks all times a day. This was for a playground project, so we wanted to get out there when the kids are using, there's a community school nearby, so we went out 2-3 o'clock when the kids are brought out from the schools to engage everybody and try and come up with activities that are the caregivers can provide information, not just parents, but all the caregivers. and then have the kids get their input too, because they have some wild ideas, but there's some pretty spectacular ideas as well. This was a fun one that we used for the URI Landscape Master Plan. We wanted to document all the trees on campus, which is a hefty task. So what we did is we engaged 2 of the plant sciences classes and had them on one of their lab days come out. We did a pre-program so they could use we're all using the same app on our phones, and spread out through the campus to document all the trees. I think we got something like 2,000 trees, maybe 700 in like a couple of hours just with the group of kids. And we also had the arborists on site, the campus arborists. So we documented size, species, general conditions, and locations across campus. We use online surveys a ton. I think they're one of the best ways to get as much information as possible. We always back up a public meeting with a survey so that, again, you can get the same questions out to the same information out to a broader public, because not everyone can attend those late night meetings. Not everyone has the abilities. Not everyone can get online to join them. Not everyone has the schedule. So oftentimes we'll have the surveys printed in multiple languages, but we'll have them printed and put in libraries. So if there's older community members that might not have access to the internet, or that we can access through the library and have be able to use the survey online that way. But we use the surveys a lot. I think the best thing that we can ever do with a survey is just always provide a big old comment box that's just blank, and let everyone, we'll ask very pointed questions, A, B, or C, and, true, false, yes, no, what time of year. But those big comment boxes are so essential to just letting anything that we didn't think of, and just letting them share whatever they want to share. It's not always nice, but that's fine. But it's, most of it is extremely helpful. So it's always great to just, let them have, let as much of the community as possible have their say about a site. We use social media as much as we can. Sometimes it works better than others. We've had bad incidences on Zoom and Zoom bombing. Facebook has worked well with communities can live stream, and then the questions come up in the comment section, similar to how we're working it tonight. This is also for URI, of course. We wanted to do an Instagram campaign where students walk around campus and have ideas or take pictures of things that they liked and didn't like. We did find out this wasn't the best medium, because I think the students who were looking at it, they said, well, we have these very carefully curated Instagram accounts, maybe that we don't want to put, URI pictures on there or something like that. So it works in some communities, it works in some projects, and doesn't work in others. We've kind of followed other projects that are doing it, and sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This is a really great project and a really fun community engagement process. Wasn't working on this project, but it sounded like so much fun. I wanted to be a part of it, so I joined the guys and helped out. So this is an expansion of a playground. Kind of very sad story is that this family lost their young son just before his 3rd birthday. But he really loved the community playground. But the playground, the 2 to 5 section, didn't have as much as it was a much smaller area than the 5 to 12 area of the playground. And apparently he was quite a fan of all things pirate. So our office set up this early afternoon session. And the Collinger Project Group invited a huge resource of the community. It was probably 2 to 3 times of what's in that image. But we knew we were going to have this pirate theme in the playground. So as soon as they came in, everyone got a pirate name. So if you prefer, for the rest of the night, Will, you can call me Fish Face McStinky. That's my official pirate name. And then they all got a pirate hat to decorate. As we went out there, and then we explained the project, but then we had everyone decorate or create a treasure map. And we had them create a flag for what would be on their pirate ship. We had pirate Mad Libs. This is Rob, my colleague, otherwise known as pantaloons, I forget his pirate name, modeling one of our pirate hats. And then because they're young kids, you know, in 2 to 5 range, we want to engage them as much as possible. We brought a tape measure and we wanted to figure out the spacing for a project. We're like, oh, these kids have tons of energy. Let's one, help them get tired out for their parents, but let's get some more information out of them too. So we had lined up the tape measure and we had all these kids jumping as far as they could. And then we kept track of all the measurements, so we knew how far to space certain elements on the site. So that was just a really fun night. And that was just pre-COVID, I think maybe a week or 2 before the shutdown happened. This is the one project I've had in the last 6 months where we had to do public engagement, and of course we had to completely regroup. So what we did for this project, it's a loop trail of the site, but we wanted to, of course, engage as many people as possible still before we had that initial meeting. So we said, all right, what if we put up signs all around the loop, and every couple 100 feet, you can answer a couple questions. So each one of these yard signs had a QR code. So you'd answer a couple questions about boating or fishing or food. And then I don't know if it was the yard signs or the community or just the project site is so beloved. Normally, we run a survey online for 3 to 4 weeks, and we'll get 200 to 400 responses depending on the community. This one ran for just a month, and we had over 1,200 responses. It was absolutely extraordinary, but it was fantastic to see. So we have a ton of feedback for this project, which is fantastic. I commented on Zoom. We used Zoom for some of the project meetings. We had some very specific breakout groups for a playground, and that worked well until it didn't. We had some issues, but we changed. But it was nice because you could do like the online surveys, right, as you were showing some options. So, like I said, everyone was kind of figuring this out at the same time. Now, this is not our work, but I thought it was so cool. I had to share it. This is Merritt Chase recently, in the last couple of weeks, had this public meeting. I think it was in Pennsylvania, but their community, they did a drive-in movie style. So they still kind of had their town hall style meeting. They presented with the big screens, but they had a drive-in, which I just thought was so cool. Obviously, you have to have a community that has the facilities and the resources to do that, ton of equipment and stage and all that. But I just thought it was a great idea. Why did I think of that? A couple things I think to dig in a little bit deeper, and if you are looking for resources on projects, there's 2 great ones that I know of that I want to share. The Boston Public Health Commission put this out just in the last couple months. It's their Equitable Community Engagement Plan, and it talks a lot about their goal is to establish trust, essentially, between the government and the community. And this goes well beyond landscape architecture. This is true for housing, for transportation, public services, health services, policymaking, budgets. So they use this all throughout the city. But it certainly gears in for us too. The city, every time we have a Boston Parks project, there's an outreach coordinator who's involved who helps us navigate this process through the city and through the communities that need to be. One example I have, I think it was one of my first public meetings that I was running, and it was in a very underrepresented community in Roxbury, just outside Boston, or part of Boston, but it was a great project. It was an urban wilds project associated or just adjacent to a public housing. And so the Parks Department did the typical flyering all around the neighborhood to let them know the community meeting was coming up. And we had the meeting was set up at a street, a library just across from the park, and only 6 people showed up, which is always a little heartbreaking because you want as much input as possible. But what we learned from one of the women that night was that there's a grave mistrust between the people that manage that public housing and the community. So that's why they misunderstood. They knew it was the city, but they didn't know which entities, and that's why we had a poor attendance. But this is a great resource if you're looking for some more information. They talk a lot about different ideas and how to engage people. The other great one is Environmental Justice in Landscape Architecture. This was put out by ASLA. Wrapping up. This is actually a student project, and it's a student award winner from 2018. It's on the ASLA website, and it kind of talks through the whole process of designing with a community, of how to reach out to people, who to reach out to. And so I just one moment, because I just want to take one little moment to a little bit of a soapbox moment. In this ASLA, they talk about the key moments in environmental justice. But to me, there's one significant thing missing. And to me, that's the, in 1990 was the American with Disabilities Act. So 15% of the world, 1 out of every 7 people has a disability to some extent. And this isn't necessarily about public engagement, but I think it's just the bigger conversation of environmental justice. And even when you look on the EPA, the federal EPA website, and their definition of environmental justice talks about race, color, national origin, or income, but there's no discussion of all ages or all abilities or multi-generational, and I think that's a bit of a shame. We did just celebrate the 30th anniversary of the ADA. It's considered a civil rights act, and I think for me, and for most people, it can be looked at as negatively, but I think it's really a positive design challenge, and shouldn't be thought of as something that we have to do, but as a way that we can create landscapes and opportunities for people of all abilities and ages. So that's my one little aside. And I just want to end with another Freddie Olmsted quote, and the fact that he referred to parks as the self-preserving instinct of civilization. And I feel like that was proven so true in the last few months. Thank you.
Danielle, I'd like Cheri and Danielle to be here so that we can ask a couple of questions. There was one question that just says that there is a trend of removing statues and the removal, cleaning of the 54th Regiment statue in the Boston Common. Does it still have a place in the park?
Yes, it's coming back. It has always intended to be returned right in its place. It was removed for restoration purposes. And I do understand that there are controversial components to that statue. And I think something that we need to keep in mind is that, at least on Boston Common, there's actually a ton of statues and monuments and plaques, and some of them really have no business being there. Some are very grounded in the place, some are grounded in Boston, some are grounded in Massachusetts, and some are completely, somebody's friend that said we need a plaque about this on Boston Common. So there's actually been a longstanding moratorium about not putting new monuments and memorials on Boston Common. And that was true until King Boston came up, and that will be the next memorial on Boston Common. It will be over near the Visitor Center. We are working very closely with the King Boston organization to make sure it's well integrated into the Common. And I will say this, that a lot of the design proposals that were coming along with the King Boston Memorial initially were met with some reservation that, does this really fit within the landscape of the Common? And I think the response from King Boston was appropriate, which was, hey, not everything's going to fit in the Common, but we believe King should be memorialized there. And it's okay to ruffle some feathers, and it's okay to change the narrative, because this place wasn't designed or ever considered to memorialize an equitable representation of the cross-section of humanity. So I thought that's a fair point. And I do think we need to be mindful as we look, especially in historic parks and landscapes, what's there and what's important, but what's the message that it sends? Because parks are for all people. And if the message is not an inclusive one, I think it's something we need to be really careful about seeing through.
Danielle, do you have any comments?
I mean, we do a lot of work at the historic preservation. I think Cheri answered that fantastically, but it's a case by case basis. I mean, like Cheri said, the parks are there for everyone, and if it offends a group of people, then it needs to be discussed. And and that's the easy answer, I guess. That's a quick answer, but
okay. Second question. There were a couple of questions about your favorite or most effective way of getting information from people or engaging people. We're asking you both to comment. What is your most effective or favorite method?
Go ahead, you go first, Danielle.
Okay. Well, I gotta say, I love the surveys because it's kind of like the Wild West. Because you open those comment boxes and let people say whatever they want, and you'll get some snarky comments, but you'll hear it all. But I think it's great because people aren't afraid to say what they think, which is really great. There's always some good chuckles when you're going through those, but there's always a ton of really useful information. But that is never going to take the place of meeting with people face to face and having a conversation, having someone tell you a story about, having a date or their first date, someone they're married to now, and sharing those kinds of stories. You're never going to learn that any other way. So any kind of meeting where you're face to face and talking to a member who uses a person who uses the site constantly, nothing's going to take the place of that.
Thanks. Cheri?
I find, I really do. I get energized in public presentations. I love them. I feel like some of the engagements that I feel have yielded the best results are ones that we really can look people in the eye and understand, especially ones that maybe have gone off the rails. We've been called into projects just to fix the public engagement process. It's gone horribly wrong. The public doesn't trust the consultant. There's yelling, there's swearing, and they bring us in to say, can you please help smooth this over? One of the things that we know that Danielle also said is you really need to develop a sense of trust for the community. And the first way to do that is to know that they're being listened to. And I feel like that is best done when you can truly see somebody, read their body language, know when their feathers are getting ruffled, know when they're getting upset, and be able to have that conversation. It certainly has been difficult online, but I do find that actually these video conversations are also pretty effective. So we had an earlier session today for Prescott Park up in Portsmouth where members of the public, we had open office hours that you could come talk about the plan. And you could see the woman was getting upset. And so I said, I see you're getting a little frustrated. What's going on? And I felt like, oh my gosh, how great. We're not even in the same room, but I could tell she was like, what do you mean you're moving the formal garden? Like she was sweating and so I feel like that for me is really the most effective, is when you can connect on that level.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question since it's already 7:08 and I don't want to keep everyone here, but I enjoy listening to you both. The question of money, does money get in the way of public engagement and really reaching people that you need to reach?
Get in the way as in there's not enough to do the big productions?
Yeah.
I'm going to say no. And I've always been accused of being overly optimistic, but I'll take it. I'm going to say no because we have literally taken, pencils and 8.5 by 11 paper and met people in a park and talked to them. No fancy graphics, no slick presentations, no clickers, and we've gotten really meaningful feedback. So I think it's possible at any level. Does money help? Oh yeah. There's no question, right? Can you provide dinner for people? Can you provide childcare? Can you do a drive-in community meeting? That was amazing. That's
right.
Amazing, right? Is it necessary? Absolutely not. If you can get yourself or the image of you on a screen to somebody, you can have meaningful public engagement.
Yeah, we're creative people. So, I mean, that's what we do. So we have to, cases like the pandemic, we have to figure out a way, but just brainstorm. And if it doesn't work one time, then we try, to do it a little differently next time. But as Cheri said, it definitely helps, but you can find 100 other ways to have that conversation and get the information that you want to mine from people.
All right. This has been a very interesting evening. This is our first lecture, and we have another one on October the 8th, I believe. I would say that if you have comments that you would like to share with us, you can get in touch with me through our website, and I'll share comments with our speakers. I think if there are any questions that about the format, I can tell you already, the format will change. We have single people, we have doubles, teams, and I have one group that's coming from South Africa, and they're not coming, but there are 4 of them, and that's going to be a different evening. So we're going to be experimenting with different formats. The key part is really you, the way that you are listening and engaging us by putting questions on the side. So I would like to say thank you for participating. Thank you for those of you that I mentioned at the start, Leah in particular, because we couldn't have run this without you, and the graphics people, and the question people, and our guests this evening, who they don't even have to stay overnight. So I want to thank everyone. I'm looking forward to our next lecture. And if you have comments, share them with us. So thank you and good night.